I was just listening to Corey Anton talk about the meta problem represented by COVID-19, and it's really good to hear from you, Corey, and glad to see you're doing well. And I recommend everyone watch Corey's video. I'm almost finished with it, but I wanted to just chime in with some thoughts about some of the metaphysical um, cracks that the virus is revealing in our modern worldview, in our modern cosmology. Because modern people have defined themselves and the world based on this bifurcation between nature and society, or between nature and man, or nature and the individual. And for capitalists, it's the individual that really matters, whereas socialists, both of these are types of modern people. Socialists think that it's society that's important and that freedom is realized socially, whereas the capitalists say freedom is realized by individuals. It's kind of a negative positive freedom distinction, right? It's all part of the modern worldview, though, whether you're capitalist or socialist, because there's an assumption that nature and society, or nature and the individual, in other words, nature and humans, are separated. Humans are free, whether we realize that freedom socially or individually, we are free. Nature is a machine, and the point of history, the way to progress economically and morally, is to use our freedom to master that mechanical nature, to re-engineer it to serve our own purposes, under the assumption that, nature is just a bunch of parts that we can rearrange and reassemble in whatever way we want, without any blowback, without any feedback, without any response, because nature can't respond, right? It's not an agent. Only humans are agents. This is the modern cosmology, and what the virus reveals is the way that, oh man, well, capitalists are realizing that they can't, as individuals or as family units, that they can't really isolate themselves from all the other people. Like, we're all connected because we live in a biosphere, and viruses have been a principal part of the evolutionary process on this planet since it started, billions of years. And socialists, I think, are also realizing that, even those countries that do have universal health care and who have socialized medicine, even they can be brought to their knees by this virus. It's not as though just because human beings have socialized medicine, the sort of allopathic, mechanistic medicine that the modern world values, that's not enough to save us from a virus. And the virus, I would see as it's just one of the tentacles of a much larger meta problem, right? Which I think the best name we can have for it is the ecological crisis, where ecology has to do with how we make home together, and that's what economy is supposed to mean too, right? How we make use the material conditions of our environment to make livable worlds. I mean, that's what economics should really be about. And the question we're faced now is, well, what would the economy look like if we took ecology seriously? And we've got to avoid the reductionisms of liberal democratic capitalism and the reductionisms of democratic socialism, and find a more complex way of inhabiting these problem spaces, right? Where we recognize that, yeah, individual freedom is important, and yeah, there is such a thing as society, and we are interconnected, and we need some basic ethical sense of camaraderie and connection, and shared responsibility. But then that kind of humanist socialism is not enough, because really we're part of societies of organisms that, our own bodies are made up of 10 times more, I think at least 10 times more bacterial DNA and bacterial cells than human cells, right? If we want to make those sorts of genetic distinctions between species. There are species, right? But even the thing about the natural world and the nature of evolution and symbiogenesis and lateral gene transfer, it's a way of looking at the biosphere. It's not just the Richard Dawkins capitalist individualist way. Dawkins' selfish gene understanding of evolution is animism, right? If an anthropologist were to look at the narratives that Dawkins spins about the history of life on this planet, they would say, oh, okay, he's projecting capitalist social relations onto the natural world, in the same way that Victorian anthropologists would look at so-called primitive people and say, oh, they're projecting their understanding of the mommy-daddy relationship onto the sun and the moon, and this is animism, right? And if we use that in the pejorative sense that those 19th century anthropologists meant it, then we have to also use it in a pejorative sense against someone like Richard Dawkins. Because the thing is, there's not just these individual competing profit-calculating organisms, or genes, rather, trying to make copies of themselves, just like we would imagine money today is just this algorithm that tries to make copies of itself. We measure the growth of the economy and our economic progress based on how much money exists. And the problem is, as Cora was pointing out, just because there are a handful of, not just billionaires, but 100 billionaires, just because there's so much more money in existence doesn't mean things are necessarily better. Because we have super yachts on the one hand, and we have people without health care, without access to food and shelter. Millions of people. And more people falling into that place of destitution, becoming the wretched of the earth. We're all increasingly at risk of becoming wretched in this condition that we've created for ourselves as modern people, and we need to eject. We can't just return to the way things were. We need to eject and build our parachute on the way down, or build our plane on the way down, so that we can start to inhabit a new world where human beings and whatever we used to think of as nature are no longer separate. We're all one big family, and life has always meant learning to live together with others. This isn't a solo journey. As much as capitalist social relations, the capitalist worldview, as much as it may want us to believe that we're in this each for ourselves, alone, trying to heroically pull ourselves up from our own bootstraps and invent ourselves and sell ourselves in a market of other competing selves. Maybe that's not the story we should be telling ourselves anymore, and teaching our kids. Maybe we need new stories, obviously. So let's start telling them.